bawling calf? You know, a bawling. Ever heard a bawling baby? A colicky baby that cries? Right? That is nature's like siren. Right? That grates on your nerves. That gets your attention. Right? Just like a police siren or a right. That's nature saying something is really wrong. Right? Babies shouldn't cry like that. Something's wrong when they do that. That's nature telling us something's wrong. What happens is we can't digest our food. We, humans, don't have the capacity to digest our food. It's the people that live inside of us that are the ones that digest our food for us. And without them, we're SOL, right? I mean, we don't function. Yes.
4-H project, Western Colorado, collected bum lambs from a big sheep operation.
Yep.
I got about 25 of these who would not be able to survive in the original environment. I brought them to try to feed them and nurse them, and I had about a 30% mortality.
Yep.
But I did get some that made me a little bit of money that helped me to go to college.
Wonderful.
It was a real struggle to get these lambs to be able to eat cow milk, be able to not have diarrhea,
Yep.
to go to the man-made formulas,
Yep.
and it was a rough go.
It's not natural. I mean, my understanding talking to you know, dairymen and graziers is that if your calf doesn't get colostrum, it's basically a dead calf. I mean, it's really hard to bring them to pull them through. When our human babies don't get their colostrum because they get put on formula right away, or they get antibiotics, which kills off the people in their gut flora, and they're colicky. We usually don't let them die. We usually stay on top of it enough to keep them from dying, but they struggle. It's a lot harder on them than it should be. So, I mean, the basic idea here is that in the same way that we have a critical gut flora symbiosis necessary for us to digest our food, it's exactly the same for plants. Plants are not able to digest the soil to pull in all the nutrients that they need to grow by themselves. They can't do it. It's only the people that live around the plant's root in what's called the rhizosphere that have those functional capacities, that have the ability to raise and lower pH and solubilize nutrients and digest them from their crystalline form into a protoplasmic form and make them food for the plant. And so the larger point I want to make is that I don't really care too much what kind of a plant you're growing. I don't really care too much whether it's alfalfa or pasture, orchard grass or apple trees or garlic or mint or cucumbers. And to a very large degree, it's much more important what the environmental conditions are down here, because the plants are going to help establish. Apple's going to have a little bit different gut flora than a cucumber is. But what happens in many cases is that we don't have the environmental conditions down here for the gut flora to exist in the first place. And that's what's messing things up. So I really, focus much of the conversation on creating the environmental conditions for the bottom of the food chain to flourish, because only when the bottom of the food chain is flourishing should we expect the top of the food chain to flourish. We had this area off the coast on New England called the Grand Banks. I'm not sure if anybody's ever heard of the Grand Banks. It's where all the fishermen between New Jersey and Newfoundland drive their boats to park to go fishing. Right? Newfoundland, New Jersey, you can see it on a map in your head. Big difference, far apart. All the fishermen from the whole coastline all drive to the same spot to park to go fishing. Why do they do that?
It's where the fish are.
It's where the fish are. And why are the fish all there?
Nutrients.
Because the food for the fish is there, right? And why is the food for the fish there? Because the environmental conditions are correct. Only when you've got the warmth and the minerals and the sunlight do you have the phytoplankton. Only where you have the phytoplankton do you have the next level, the next level, the next level. So in many cases, we talk about feeding our plants, and really, while you can keep a plant alive by feeding it, foundationally, if you want to be able to stand back and do less and less work, it's about creating an environment where the bottom of the food chain is flourishing. From my perspective, this is sort of the foundational argument. If you're not okay with this idea, I'll give you a refund. this is basically, this is my dogma. This is the philosophy of the course. So that's what we're going to be talking about, is how do you create the environmental conditions for life to flourish. And then when you do that, you should be able to stand back and do much less work and have more productivity. People know about the Native Americans and the manner in which the Americas were being managed by them when white men came. From a production standpoint, how many pounds of beef were being raised, how many apples were being produced, how many fish were in the rivers. What's that? They were putting the Native Americans, as I understand it, said the role of the human animal was caretaker of the land, and the caretaker sees where they can put a light effort here and light effort there, and we can modulate. We can start a little fire here. We can collar these trees over here, et cetera, et cetera. But my understanding is that if we can work well with nature, we can do much less work and get much more productivity. That's a bit out of the model of our conventional monocrop tillage, bare soil form of agriculture. But my perspective, I'm trying to grow food and make a living doing it, and not work too hard. And it seems to me that the more machinery I use and the more expenses I have, and a lot of our assumptions about the way agriculture should be done, I think, are wrong. And if we can learn how nature does it, we'll be benefited in many cases. So, okay, so we got a basic picture here. So the question from there is, what does this life in the soil need to exist? What must be present in your soil if you want your plants to grow well? Nutrients. Okay, we got nutrients. We'll call those minerals.
Soluble.
Microbes. Call it life.
Water.
Water. Air.
Animals.
Animals. Let's say animals.
Worms.
Life will sort of the whole food chain. Maybe will sort of fit into this rubric of life. Energy, food, yeah, organic matter. I'm going to split carbon here, but that's either sugar or dead plants, which you can't get if you don't have sun, right? Sometimes when I give these courses, and there's people who live in the suburbs who are trying to have a garden, and they know where they want to have the garden, and the plants don't grow, and you ask them about some of the details, and it happens to be they only get 2.5 hours of sunlight a day, because their neighbor's trees are on the south side of their garden. Of course, you need sunlight, and warmth also you need. So I'm going to assume people can know that you don't plant things in February, or at least not very much in February, and you need sunlight. So I'm going to assume those basic things. I think there's a lot of management practices that we can discuss that generally seem to empower people. So focusing on these 5 topic areas is where I like to go with the conversation. And in many cases, there's some really simple things you can do to address those deficiencies. So that's what's written here on the bottom of slide number 2, minerals, biology, carbon, water, air. The basic principle and objective is to address limiting factors. The assumption is life will do the best that she can with what she has available to her. So our work as farmers is growers of all sizes, is to identify what the limiting factors are that are keeping life from flourishing and address them. And then you can stand back and do much less in general. So goes the philosophy. This has generally been my experience. Supporting and empowering soil life is the key to healthy plants. I think we basically, discussed that, made that point. What's that?
You can't figure out where you are.
Page 1 is on the back of page 3 for most people. I'm on slide number 3 of page number 1.
All right, here it is, okay.
Okay, there we go. Getting there. Things that you do or let be done that harm soil life, harm your plants. Anybody ever been, I like to talk about shiny leaves. You know what shiny leaves look like? On your grass or on your, broccoli or on your summer squash plant. When the leaves are shiny, you know that look. And then you know that sometimes the heat of the summer comes and they stop looking shiny. Seen that shine go away? First question is, what's the shine? It's fat. It's fat. It's called the lipid layer. We talk about the lipid layer, the waxy cuticle on the leaf. We know that as animals, when we get too much to eat, when we eat more than we need, we stockpile it in the form of fat. People have heard about this at least. We don't have any experience with it. Most people don't have any experience with that. Plants, when they get too much to eat, stockpile the extra energy in the form of fat. They stockpile it on their leaf, so when their leaves are shiny, that means they're fat and happy. Right? A shiny leaf plant is a fat and happy plant. And when the heat of the summer comes on and that shine goes away, my understanding is that in many cases, simply what happened is it got hot for a week or 10 days in July and didn't rain and the soil dried out. And you think there's enough water there for the plants to grow because, you know, their roots are decently deep and you can reach your hand down there far enough and you can find some moisture, so there must be moisture for them. So it wasn't that the plants didn't have access to water. It was that the people who were living in the area where there's no water were all dead. Right? You can reach down, you can dig down, you can find moisture 4 inches down or 6 inches down, find the plants still have access to water, but all the people living up here, the 500 billion of them in every tablespoon of soil, when the soil is powdery and there's no water, they're dead. You got chickens, you got cats, you got children. Don't feed them, don't water them for a couple days and see what happens. Right? A couple days. Life cycle of bacterium, not that long. How long does it take for the soil being dry for the life of the soil to be dead? It doesn't take too long. If they're the ones that are feeding the plant, when they stop feeding the plant hasn't eaten for a few days, it starts to eat up its fat reserves. That shine goes off the leaf because the plant is hungry. So I said, things that you do or let be done that harm soil life harm your plants. Letting your soil dry out is one of the best ways to harm your plants because it harms the soil life. This is rudimentary, it's nothing fancy, nothing complicated, and in many cases we don't maintain hydration. We don't maintain sufficient water in the soil for our plants to keep growing through the growing season. This is embarrassing. It's embarrassing how simple a lot of this stuff is, and unless we understand it, we don't necessarily do anything about it. Not that understanding is sufficient in many cases, but I mean, there's a bunch of questions about minerals here and all that stuff, sourcing them and blah, 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 blah. What I like to say is if you can't maintain hydration, don't waste your money on minerals. It's not my line, actually. It was a guy named Kerry Reams who said it, who is, anybody know who Kerry Reams was? A couple people in the back row know Kerry Reams.
Took his course in 1980.
What's that?
Took his course in 1980.
Right, well, wonderful. Yeah, not long before he passed.
Yeah.
My understanding, one of the sort of visionaries of this century, the past century, as far as agriculture is concerned, and human health too. Reams, one of his aphorisms was, if you cannot maintain hydration, don't waste your money on minerals. If you do not have the capacity to keep moisture in your soil through the growing season, you are wasting your money by putting minerals down. Right? Water is critical for life. Of course, we need copper and boron and calcium for biological system function, but if there's no life because there's no water, it doesn't matter. Yes?
Can you just say his name one more time?
Kerry Reams, R-E-A-M-S. The Reams Biological Theory of Ionization, RBTI, is a really interesting topic area for those who are interested.
Best place to get books is Pike Agri Labs.
PikeAgri.com.
Stone, Maine.
Bob Pike in Maine was one of Reams' students, is still alive. PikeAgri.com. Yeah, all kinds of tools, and Reams was able to use a refractometer and a conductivity meter to test people's urine and saliva and tell you whether you had heart disease or colon cancer or you're about to get a brain aneurysm. And not only could he tell you what was wrong with you, but he could tell you that you need some lemon juice, every hour, 2 ounces. You need vinegar. He looked at things from the energy of the things. He didn't care so much about what's the levels of the low. He I think he was a clairvoyant. My understanding is he was clairvoyant. I never met him, but from talking to people who did, he saw that he looked at the spin of the electron cloud, not the electron cloud, the nucleus of the element, and he would say, look, these guys are all spinning in a clockwise manner, these guys are all spinning in a counterclockwise manner. It's when the opposite spins come together that the energy is released, and so he would look at the balance of your spin, he called male energy and female energy. This direction of spin is male, this direction of spin is female, and he'd say, you have too much male energy, therefore you need to balance out with female energy. And he could get people who were, stage 4, go home and die, cancer, give them some lemon juice on the hour and, distilled water on the half hour, and their cancer would disappear, right? I mean, just ridiculous responses, thousands and thousands and thousands of people. He wasn't just an agronomist, he wasn't just helping farmers, he was helping humans too. Really interesting character. Almost no one's heard about him. It's really unfortunate. But anyways, tangent. Many, many tangents. If you cannot maintain hydration, don't waste your money on minerals. What you do that harms, or let be done that harms soil life, harms your plants. You guys whispering about here in the front row?
Everybody that talks to nutrition theory, the hardest thing to do is to get them to drink water. They just want to
Yeah.
take supplements. I'm like, all you have to start with a little simple.
Water's really
foundation.
actually kind of important.
Yeah, and it's like all the
Depends
stuff
on
is
the
like
water you're
similar.
drinking, though, it can be
Yeah.
harmful.
But you still need to drink to
I used to
hydrate.
think, yeah, but if you're getting it from fresh fruits and vegetables, it's a different kind of water.
Town water,
Water.
city water is, yeah.
It's really not just, but even when it's not alive, like, it's structured.
Water's one of our topics for later the day tomorrow. Water is a really, really interesting topic. It's not just H2O.
Yeah.
Anybody ever irrigated the garden with a hose or with whatever kind of irrigation system in the drought, and then it rains? Right, you irrigate and irrigate and irrigate and irrigate, and the plants sort of stay alive but don't really do anything, and then it rains and poof, they take off. Right? Like, it wasn't the water that made them grow, it was something about the water, right? It was the energy in the water. Water is a really, really interesting topic. Really, really interesting. There's a lot of really, really interesting stuff, and we have this sort of chemistry analysis of things. We've broken it down to the atomic, and then we know what it is because we know what the atomics is, right? I mean, I think there's actually a lot more going on. It seems to be the data is telling us there's more going on, and working with water in living systems is, running water, stream water is different than irrigation water. Putting water through a pipe makes water unhappy, right? It loses its energy. You've tasted stagnant water, right? You can taste stagnant water is different than spring water. It feels different in your mouth. So these kind of subtleties seem to have a big effect on life. Anyways, maybe I'll just talk about a couple of basic things of maintaining hydration. So strategic ways of addressing deficiencies as far as hydration is concerned. How do you manage for maintaining water? My experience as a farmer growing up, and watching the weather for the past 30 years, plus or minus, it seems like there's getting to be more and more extremes in the weather. It seems like we're getting more and more periods of like 6 weeks with nothing but hot and dry and sunlight, and then 3 weeks of cloudy and cold and rainy, and then February is in the 60s and April's in the below 10. I think we got more snow in April than we got in February in Massachusetts last year we got 10 feet in February, right? I mean, it's just all over the map. So call it climate change, call it global warming, call it law of the averages, I don't care what you call it. Being prepared for extremes in the weather, I think, is just plain old good strategy. And so water is really important. What are some ways in which you can maintain hydration in your land? What are some basic strategies? So rudimentary level of maintaining hydration is keep your soil covered. Where in nature do you see bare soil? How well is nature doing in the desert? Yeah, nature, we talk about Mother Nature. You've heard about this one? Yeah, she's a woman. I like to say she's a woman, she's modest, she likes to keep herself covered. Anything that you do which forcibly rips her clothes off, think about that being your mother. And you are ripping her clothes off, or someone else's mother. How would someone else feel if you ripped their mother's clothes off? Right? She likes to keep herself covered. Nature keeps herself covered, whether it's through green growing things or dead plant material. Nature does everything she can, it seems to be, to keep herself covered, to keep the soil from being visible. So anything that we do to cause soil to be uncovered, we can say is violating nature to some decent degree, more or less. I like to say on my farm where I do grow annuals in the annual growing area, I want to be able to see my soil less than 2 weeks of the year. Sure, I'm going to be preparing the soil for planting seeds and things like that. There's going to be periods in time when I can see the soil. Let it be as little as possible. Let it be as short a period of time as possible, and all things in moderation. I gave a course in Iowa this fall, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of acres that get tilled up just because in the fall, right? They could leave the stubble there. They could plant cover crops, but they get the big tractor out and go for it, just do some plowing. I've heard it called recreational tillage. I read about this. It's fun to drive a big tractor. You feel like a real man driving a big tractor. Nope, gotta go plow the fields. It's time for fall tillage. All right. That's a real good way to wear out the ground. Organic matter oxidizes, right? So if we talk about the life in the soil being present here, whether we want to talk about it or not, they need food to eat. They eat the sugar, like I said, that comes out of the plant leaves. If there's no sugar coming down from the plant leaves because there's no plants growing there, they'll eat the organic matter that's in the soil. And when they get done eating the organic matter, then they die off. And so when you till up the soil and you don't have anything growing there, you don't have any mulch there, you don't have any leaves or straw or hay covering the ground, that's a great way to eat up and functionally oxidize all your organic matter, turn it into carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. My understanding is that at least 40% of the CO2 that's been added to the atmosphere since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution has not come from hydrocarbons, not come from burning oil or coal or gas or wood. It's come from burning soil. The process of tillage, the process of chemical farming, is a process of oxidizing the soil, turning organic matter from the soil into carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So 40% of the CO2 that's been added to the atmosphere, at least, this is a minimum, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution has not come from burning hydrocarbons, it's come from burning out soil. So things that we do like tillage that keep the soil bare, or even weeding, regular cultivation, keeping the soil bare, right? I mean, you don't see the ground bare in the middle of the summer anywhere except for people's fields. That's not how nature does it. Nature does not keep herself bare. In the hot and the dry, the best way to wick this water out of the soil is to have it be bare. Keeping it covered with leaves or with straw or with hay or with cover crop residue, that keeps the moisture in the soil much more, and you have much more reserve. And the more organic matter you've got, the more water your soil can hold, et cetera, et cetera. So keeping your soil covered is a sort of foundational principle for maintaining hydration. Is there a question? Yeah.
Tillage, tearing up the soil in Africa now has resulted in about, I think the number is 20 million hectares of desert.
Yeah. Deserts are growing rapidly all over the place. Yeah, India, China, Africa, U.S., everywhere.
This drives the starvation in the world.
Foundationally, and not just the tillage, but the chemical farming too. The Green Revolution. I worked in villages in India, and I saw literally people starving to death and moving to the cities to sell their bodies because they simply cannot eke a living off the land anymore, which they were able to do for thousands and thousands of years until the Green Revolution came. The Green Revolution, the chemical fertilizer burned off the little bit of organic matter they were able to maintain. Now it's gone. Now the soil's dead. Now they're starving to death. Now they're going to the cities. And we've got, 30 million people living in whatever, Bombay, right? The slums, the whole thing. If you've been to Africa, we have these megalopolises where we have millions, tens of millions of people living in abject poverty because the soil is worn out. My perspective, the way we solve a lot of these deeper cultural problems is by building soil. And there's no reason we can't turn that desert back into green. There's absolutely no reason we can't do that. in many cases. I've got a friend who's working in China. It's, you know, we can't talk about it because it's not been published yet, but I mean, doing amazing things, turning the desert green, millions of acres at a time, right? Systemically doing this, changing the weather patterns so we go from 2 to 3 inches of rain per year to 12 or 13 inches of rain per year. Absolutely changing the weather patterns, changing the climate through managing the soil intelligently. It's totally doable. It's really exciting. But anyways, so yes.
Can you clarify the use of mulches of, you know, dead material, organic matter versus a living mulch? And what sort, you know, how much does a living mulch protect the soil in terms of moisture conservation? And how much you're losing in transpiration out of that living mulch?
So there's this idea that weeds, you know, compete with your crops for water and things like that. My experience last summer was another one of our, I think 4 out of the last 5 summers, we've had about 6 weeks from the middle of July to the end of August with no clouds, you know, humidity levels like 15-20%, in the 80s, just totally dead. There's no clouds, right? I mean, something was wrong. There should be clouds. There should be thunderstorms. There's not. It's really not right. The areas where I had bare soil, it was powder. It was absolute powder. The areas where there were weeds growing that I hadn't tilled up to plant something, there was much more structure. There was much more moisture in the soil. I personally think if the plants that are growing there are not shading out my crops, they're not weeds. That's polyculture. That's how nature does things. Where do you see monocultures in nature? In the cornfield? Forest? Where? Monoculture? Nature does not do monocultures. The loblolly pines is not nature, right? Kudzu is an invasive, but you will not see kudzu in a old growth forest. You'll see kudzu in a worn out pasture where everything is in rough shape.
Margin of woods.
What's that?
At the margin of woods, at the edge of the woods, that's your.
Right, which is
In the dirt.
not natural. If you let nature just be for a while, you're not going to find monocultures, as I understand it.
Repeat what you just said. If it's not competing for sunlight.
Then it's not a weed.
Then it's not a weed.
You were the one who asked about the guilds, weren't you?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I was just wondering about that, because
Yes.
I posted on the site, I was trying to get some guidance about all the native, you know, like the dead nettle and the ground ivy and
Precisely.
all the violets. And I'm
Yep.
like, should I be pulling this up?
No.
Can I leave it?
So the idea here is that nature might have figured a few things out,
Right.
right? Nature has been around for a little while and might have figured a few things out. And just because we have tools to measure things doesn't mean we necessarily know better. So, I mean, my thought here basically is that watching what works and trying to emulate it, biomimicry, you've heard the term perhaps, biomimicry, we look at life, we look at nature, and we see how does nature work, and we try to work in harmony with nature instead of trying to apply what we think is better. And the idea here is that you don't see bare soil in nature, you don't see monocultures in nature, right? I mean, it's not how nature does it. Nature does polyculture. Nature does multiple species of plants growing together. And so, you know, understories of white clover growing underneath your kale plants, I think, is wonderful, as an example,
Yeah.
right? There's no reason why you have to have bare soil under your tomatoes. There's no reason why plants growing around your crops are bad, except maybe if they're shading them and keeping them from getting sunlight. If you come to my farm, it will look all weedy and, you know, unkempt, and you see me not in the field, but out swimming with my kids, and then you see how much money I made this week, you see how often I spend out in the field, and you're like, wait a minute. So it looks all weedy and messy, but he's making good money, and he's not working very hard. You're like, okay, nature might look weedy and messy, right? It's not like it's got straight lines and everything's clean and organized, but everything's flourishing because that's how nature does things. There's multiple layers of canopy and all that kind of thing. So,
Okay.
did that answer your question somewhat?
Yeah, pretty well.
Pretty well?
Yeah.
If there's pieces I haven't touched on yet, tell me.
No.
No? Well, good enough for now.
You incorporate a lot of Masanawa, Fukunova's stuff into your culture?
Fukuoka was one of our brilliant elders, as far as I'm concerned. People who've not heard of the One Star Revolution, this was sort of a big seminal text. I think it was published in the mid-'80s, first in English. Fukuoka, the author, was a Japanese farmer. And he, mastered the art of doing as little as possible farming and making good money growing healthy plants. He had his perennials growing with his annuals underneath him. He would come through every now and then with this little, a scythe or a sickle and cut down some weeds and throw some seeds down and come back a few, like he would like I like to do. He liked to amble about his property. Anybody like to go for a walk on their land? Like, I would really just if I could choose what to do, I'd just go for a walk on my land. And while you're going out for a walk, you notice things and you see things and you just pick things and that's basically what he was doing, which I think is not too much far off from what the Native Americans are doing. They were, ambling through the land and touching it here and touching it there and doing little bits, but not a hell of a lot. And so,
An old adverb is the best fertilizer for the land is the footsteps of the farmer.
the farmer's footprints are the best fertilizer. The farmer's shadow is the best fertilizer. Exactly. Which is, we have to talk about consciousness and intention, and your presence actually is part of reality, and your thoughts. And can I go off that deep end yet, or should I wait a little while? I'm not sure where the audience is in this topic, but what is nutrition? What is food for? Is it just the elements in the cucumber, or is there something else about the cucumber that makes it different, that makes you feel more energized when you eat it, right? People have heard of Rudolf Steiner, I'm guessing, with biodynamics. There's one of Steiner's students, a guy named Pfeiffer, Aaron Reed Pfeiffer, asked Steiner at one point, why is it that when we sit down to meditate, call it pray if you want to be Christian, or call it meditate if you want to be not, I don't really care. Why is it that when we sit down to meditate, to pray, and we can feel that communion with the divine, we get to that state where we are experiencing something real, visceral, we experience it, we don't have words for it really. Why can't we maintain that when we get up to go about our day? Anybody had this experience? Anybody had the experience of sitting down and really connecting and feeling something, and then you get up to go out your day and you want to stay in that state, and it's gone? My experience has been that it just gone. I'm there, oh, no, I'm not. No, that's gone. And Pfeiffer asked Steiner, why is it that we can't maintain that state of consciousness? And Steiner said, because your food does not have enough soul force. Because your food does not have enough soul force. And I don't know what he meant by soul force. He said it was, of course, he was speaking German, which was then translated, and so I haven't done the tracking down to see what the other versions of that word are. But I was just talking to somebody recently who was, her teacher was an Indian sort of Swami guy, and he had a similar comment, which was that the plants are basically this vessel that are producing food, but it's the intention of the farmer. If you are, when you're walking out and in your fields, if you're feeling this intention of this being nutrition, this being food for your cows or for your customers or for your family, the act of sort of praying that into your plants is the soul force, is how you get that nutrition, that value into your plants. I don't know any, that sounds pretty interesting to me, and why not pray while you're walking, right? That's not going to hurt too bad, I don't think. It might even be good for you. Why are we growing food in the first place? It's to feed people, isn't it? So let's do it with as much good intention as possible. Anyway, it's all really interesting. I don't know, I haven't found anybody who has all the answers, but it's It's all really interesting.
My
Yeah.
personal experience is when I go into the garden, analytically, left brain,
Yeah.
I do not achieve any state of exaltation.
Yes.